Good afternoon and welcome to February's Project Green Sunday Garden Forum. I'm Linda Schreiber. I am the substitute for the Garden Forum Chair, Connie Gabe, who is vacationing in sunny California. We hope our forums inspire you. These lectures offer gardeners information, education, and some much-needed solace during Iowa's long winter months. Before we start today, I want to thank our partner, the Iowa City Public Library, and Beth Fisher and Bond for helping us get the room set up and making sure all the equipment is operational. The Iowa City Public Library has been Project Green's original partner to present these garden forums. The library live streams the presentations, and the programs are also replayed on the library's Channel 4, and they're available for checkout. Our next forum will be held March 4th with Deb Walzer, who will present tips on growing berries. She will also introduce us to the newest and coolest plants for 2018. Mark your calendars. Our annual garden fair and plant sale will be held Saturday, May 5th at Carver Hawkeye Arena. This is a week earlier than our traditional Mother's Day weekend due to the university's graduation ceremony at Carver. The quilt in the front of the room is a feature and theme of our garden tour that will be held Saturday, June 23rd. Raffle tickets for this beautiful quilt are available now and throughout the tour. We have a sign-up sheet here at the front. If you're interested in the quilt and buying a raffle, just sign up there and we'll get in touch with you. This year, Project Green is celebrating a major milestone, 50 years of service to the community. Through the years, Project Green has funded $2 million in projects in our community, including Project Green Gardens, a public garden at the Ashton House at 820 Park Road, and the Terry Trueblood Recreation Center. Our efforts have grown to include parks, roadsides, riverfront, medium parkways, and public school grounds. We hope you'll consider joining Project Green. You can support our nonprofit organization with your time, your talent, and your donations. We invite you to volunteer for any number of projects, and your financial contributions are greatly appreciated and may be made to our endowment fund at the Community Foundation of Johnson County online or via the City of Iowa City. We also want to thank our door prize contributors today, Iowa City Landscaping and Garden Center, Garden Design. The publisher of this magazine will donate $12 for each subscription placed. And Project Green, they're donating some mugs and calendars to commemorate their anniversary. Please take a moment, if you haven't already done so, and silence your cell phones. Today we're going to start with a presentation from Laura Hawks, followed by a 15-minute refreshment break, and we'll conclude with question and answers and then a drawing for door prizes. If you'd rather write out your question, there's a sign-up sheet up front as well that you can write it out during the break. It is a pleasure to introduce Laura Hawks today. She received a BA in Landscape Architecture from Iowa State University and holds professional registrations in Iowa and Wisconsin. While she started her professional career in Illinois, she has practiced her trade in the Iowa City area the past 30 years. Laura is the owner and principal of Hawks Design and works with residential and commercial clients in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She's received lots of recognition from the Iowa City Historic Preservation Commission and the City of Iowa City, and awards from Iowa and the American Society of Landscape Architects. Laura provides Project Green consulting services, and she is also a valued volunteer. Today, she will address her 18-year relationship with Project Green, including the restoration of the Ashton House landscape and city entrances and parkway projects that showcase examples of her specialty and passion for plant materials. Let's make sure Laura reveals her personal connection to the Ashton House as well. Please join me in welcoming Laura Hawks.
Thank you, Linda. And it's so great to be here today. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to share my plant material expertise today, which is a passion of mine. Through the years, I've developed parkway landscape improvement plans, and as Linda said, more recently, the Ashton House Project Green Gardens landscape plan. In most cases, my work consisted of building upon plans that had been done in the 1960s and 70s by previous landscape architects and founders of Project Green. As this year marks Project Green's 50th anniversary, I'll also be including interesting and significant Project Green history as it pertains to parkway and other urban planning projects. Historic information and photos are from Project Green and Ashton collection at the State Historic Society and the Women's Archives at the University of Iowa Library. Additionally, Jim Maynard provided wonderful insight, photos, and stories and history for this presentation. Okay. Years before 1968, which marked the founding of Project Green, the City Beautiful movement left vestiges of urban patterns and parkways that may have influenced founders of Project Green. Why do we landscape our city's parkways? When did this civic idea get started? What does a well-maintained parkway do for you? The City Beautiful movement began in 1893 after the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. At that time, when America was going through the Industrial Revolution and America was becoming an industrial capital of the world, cities' green spaces and roadways were neglected. People saw what a beautiful city space was like after visiting the World Fair in Chicago and wanted these same aesthetics in their own communities. A young journalist by the name of Charles Mulford Robinson, who covered the World's Fair and who was thoroughly impressed by the beauty of the spaces as designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, brought the concept of civic aesthetics to the nation. Robinson was hired by several cities to develop City Beautiful planning recommendations. Typical characteristics of the City Beautiful movement city improvements included clean civic parkways with pastoral landscapes, boulevards, which included lawns and trees and oftentimes had a focal point of a classic or Beaux Arts style building, and monumental spaces. Cedar Rapids was among one of the cities in the early 1900s that received recommendations from Robinson. And this slide shows a cover of a report that he prepared back in 1908. Iowa City includes elements in line with the City Beautiful movement: landscape parkways, landscape boulevard that focuses on an important public building in a classic style, trails, open spaces, and parks with trees and lawn. What was happening back in the 1960s and 70s here in Iowa City? I don't know if you can recall. But our community members were facing a lot of issues environmentally and on an urban planning scale. Community members were concerned and were trying to solve all these problems. In 1967, the then mayor, Frank Smiley, appointed 3 key Project Green leaders to a 40-person advisory committee called Citizens for a Better Iowa City. In a New York Times article written in 1973 titled "It's Happening Right There in Iowa City," Gretchen Hershberger states, "There were many people who felt that something needed to be done, but there was no leadership to take hold and show the way. This is how Project Green came to function. We like to think of it as the spirit behind the action. We found that by insisting and encouraging the keys to any kind of movement like this, we were able to get things started." Some of the issues in the 60s were urban renewal. Empty lots sat empty in the downtown area. Historic buildings were threatened. There was environmental degradation. According to the same New York Times article, the Iowa riverbanks were badly eroding at the time. Interstate 80 in eastern Iowa was under construction and was completed in 1966. The Highway 6 bypass in Iowa City was being built. North Dubuque Street and Melrose Avenue were both being built with minimal or very little landscaping at the time. Following a public meeting about community beautification and the successes of volunteer citizen action groups around the country, Project Green founders Gretchen, Nancy, and Jim made the decision to try and create such an organization in Iowa City. The founders decided that an organization that can partner with the city and act would enable them to make positive and tangible improvements to the quality of life in Iowa City. And I wanted to provide a brief biography of each one of the founders of Project Green. Nancy Seiberling was fully committed to Project Green's philosophy. And a lot of what I'm saying is based on a tribute that Jim Maynard prepared for Nancy Seiberling's celebration at the Ashton House a few years ago. Nancy coined the name Project Green and the goal, Grow to Reach Environmental Excellence Now, for the acronym GREEN. The first challenge was recruiting a core of committed, like-minded people to form a steering committee. Nancy knew many of the right people who had the interests, capabilities, and talents needed. Among the first group were Kay Gillis, Gilma McCuskey, Bernie Knight, Marilyn Long, Mary Lou Gay, Mary Bell Glick, Emily Rubright, Mary Ellen Comley, Lawrence LaFour, George Mather, Mary Ellen McFadden, Joan Parsons, Melanie Hoppert, and Ann Hesse, and a number of others. Their achievements and continued contributions to the success of Project Green have become a part of Nancy's legacy. Nancy filled many roles. She was an advocate, a promoter, a publicist, a lobbyist, a fundraiser, a counselor, organizer, team leader, crew supervisor, and motivator. She was tireless in her efforts to promote Project Green to the business community and to local government officials to obtain local support for a new project or a program. Nancy became a catalyst for undertaking a diverse number of projects in the very first year. Among them included the first annual garden tour. It included the announcing of the creation of Project Green at the first annual Project Green Luncheon sponsored by Sears and Roebuck to promote public support and understanding of its purposes and goals. Also, she presented a lecture series on landscape design similar to our winter forum now. She prepared materials for schools' use for Arbor Day observances, created an architectural heritage committee, held a public meeting on Iowa City's architectural heritage, wrote a weekly What's Blooming column in the Iowa City Press Citizen, contributed articles on landscaping, gardening, and home improvements for 2 Press Citizen special supplements. She initiated an annual awards program recognizing excellence in architecture, landscape design, and graphic identification design. And she also, and Project Green at the time, conducted a fundraiser for Iowa Avenue landscaping. Jim Maynard served with Nancy as a co-chair during these first years. Moving on to Jim Maynard. Jim has contributed enormously to Project Green, from providing guidance in organizational planning to landscape architectural design and creation of landscape maintenance standards, which are largely still followed today. He's practiced professionally as a landscape architect since 1958, and he's continuing to contribute. He became registered as a landscape architect in Iowa from 1976 through 2008. He graduated from Iowa State University in 1958 with a BA in landscape architecture. Additionally, he has an MA in public affairs from the University of Iowa and has completed graduate study in community and regional planning and business administration. His background working experiences includes manager of design and construction services with Pleasant Valley Nursery, and as Director of Planning and Landscape Architecture at Power and Willis in Iowa City. The next founder I'd like to talk about is Gretchen Hershberger, which many of the plans that I've worked on, she had worked on many years before in the 60s and the early 70s. Gretchen Fisher Hershberger was born on March 22nd, 1906 in Shenandoah, Iowa. She was a daughter of Frederick and Helen Field Fisher and niece of Henry Field, founder of the Field Seed Company. For 25 years, her mother broadcast from her home and was known as the radio flower lady of the Midwest. Gretchen Fisher attended Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri, and graduated in 1928 from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, with a degree in landscape architecture. She received the Sands Memorial Medal for Distinguished Achievement and the Sampson Fine Arts Prize for Art Appreciation. In 1928, Fisher married H. Clay Hershberger, who later served as chairman of the Department of Speech and Dramatic Arts at the State University of Iowa. Gretchen was a nationally recognized professional landscape architect, author, and photographer. She wrote the McCall's Garden Book in 1968 and the Flower Family Album with her mother, Helen Field. In 1940, she was also the garden editor for Household Magazine and American Homes, and the president of the Garden Writers Association of America and the American Hemerocallis Society. Hershberger received numerous national and local awards for her contributions to horticulture. And this leads us to the goals that Project Green established back in 1968 included beautifying the parkways into the city, promoting good design and landscape architecture, providing quality maintenance of those areas, encouraging neighborhood development ideas, preserving open space, historical landmarks, and natural features, and the environment, and promoting environmental education through a biannual newsletter, articles, a winter forum, garden fair, and garden tour. In my experience, I early on worked with Ann Hesse and A.K. Traw as the co-chairs. My first meeting with Project Green was in the year 2000 when there was a request for proposals, and I had submitted a proposal with Craig Ritland of Waterloo, another landscape architect, for landscaping the North Dubuque Street entry area. I then, after that project, continued to work with Project Green, and now it's 2018, and I'm still here, so I'm very happy about that. Currently, I am working with co-chairs Diane Allen and Cindy Parsons, and they continue to provide excellent leadership and vision to Project Green. Volunteers continue to have a just do it work ethic that compels them to improve our community's quality of life. Cindy and Diane both are working along with others to bring Project Green into the next century. Some of their milestone efforts beyond directing all of Project Green's events, volunteer efforts, and fundraisers have included the Project Green Gardens at the Ashton House, the receipt of a REAP grant award in 2015 for Ashton House grounds, Kindergarten Trees program in partnership with the Iowa City Landscaping and Iowa City Community School District, and continuing the strong presence of Project Green in the Iowa City area. And these are two of the recent awards that they've won. The first one in 2012 includes a Project Green and Iowa City Landscaping were named as 2012 Outstanding Local Partners of the Year for the Kindergarten Tree Project by the Iowa Urban and Community Forestry Council. For the same project, Project Green was awarded the Partnership Excellence Award for the from the Iowa City Area Chamber of Commerce Education Committee in 2015. Through the years, we've had probably thousands of volunteers involved with Project Green. They have been there for parkway plantings and from the very beginning of the organization, a very vital element. And whether through plantings along parkways or at the Ashton House kindergarten trees, the plant fair in May, the garden tour, or during the summer on different parkways projects, they're definitely involved with the projects. They've come from various organizations such as the Boy Scouts, the Iowa National Guard, the Girl Scouts, the University of Iowa students, and many other organizations. And these volunteers, they continue till this day, and this is sort of a collage of the different volunteers that have been so active at the Ashton House and the Nancy Seiberling Memorial Garden, preparing for the plant fair. They're just very much a vital part of the Project Green organization. Okay, and this, let me see, Iowa Avenue. We will begin here on Iowa Avenue. Through the years, Project Green's effort has grown to include landscape renovation, design, and maintenance of important community entries and parkways. They include Iowa Avenue, the Highway 6 bypass from South Riverside Drive out to the eastern property line of Fair Meadows subdivision, Melrose Avenue, from Emerald Street up to Highway 218, North Dubuque Street from Park Road to I-80, and the Mormon Trek Viaduct South Planters. And we'll start with the very first project that Project Green undertook was Iowa Avenue. And basically, this is how Iowa Avenue looked back before 1968, and this is from the Historic Society. And I believe at the time Project Green worked with the city, and the partnership with the city is critical with our efforts. And they agreed to replace the curbing around the boulevard area. And then Project Green at that early time period raised the funds to landscape the boulevard. And this shows Gretchen Hershberger's original plan, which Jim Maynard provided to me, which is still very much in place today. Many of the original plant materials are thriving. Some of them included multi-stem amber maple and floribunda crabs and serpentine beds of yews, spreading yews. And at that time, Gretchen also relocated a couple very old yews from construction sites. And they've been very sculpturally pruned through the years, and they exist even today on Iowa Avenue. And then this shows an older photo of how that planting looked back in the 60s and early 70s. Then after the tornado of 2006, I don't know if you remember that in April on Holy Thursday, the tornado went right through this area and damaged a lot of the plant material and also damaged College Square Park. And Jim Maynard at that time came in and provided renovation landscape plans for Iowa Avenue. And he oversaw the implementation of that plan, and those are still in place today. So now it is a lovely boulevard with eastern redbuds, some of which are very historical, and other plantings that provide seasonal interest throughout the year from winter time through the winter months all the way through fall. And this just shows a dwarf Korean lilac grouping that's in full bloom. Through the years, Project Green has also hired me to prepare bidding documents for maintenance of the parkways. So for several years, since 2009, I've been conducting that process. So Project Green oversees the maintenance of the shrubs and the shrub beds and all the pruning of the trees. The city actually provides the mowing along these areas. And this shows a red bear and flowering crab in the foreground, and then the floribunda crab that Gretchen had spec'd out for her plans back in the 60s. Okay. This just shows a dwarf serviceberry along the boulevard, and they provide some noise abatement for surrounding residents also, the plant material and the low serviceberry. There were originally burning bush were included in Gretchen's plan. They were replaced with the dwarf serviceberry at the time. And you can see the Japanese yew in the center slide that is very sculptural looking. And the next project in 1969 and 1971 that Project Green focused on was the Highway 6 bypass. And this basically was from the Crandick Railroad right away to the east boundary line of the Fairmeadow subdivision. And this shows just a before shot of what Highway 6 looked like and would look like today if Project Green had not kind of jumped in and took action on this. It would just be a very large Iowa Department of Transportation right-of-way space. Project Green did work with the city and the Department of Transportation to apply for a planting permit along this stretch. And they were provided with that planting permit required, and then also the permit required Project Green to maintain that plant material along the right-of-way. Project Green has continued to maintain it. Portions of this parkway. It does not include the mowing, but the maintenance of the juniper beds and other planting areas and some pruning work along Highway 6. And this shows, this is Kay Gillis laying out her planting bed design. She teamed with Jim Maynard at the time to develop planting plans for the Highway 6 area. And their plans included 8 species of flowering crab apples, as well as Washington hawthorn, Scotch and Austrian pines, many of which have been replaced with Swiss mountain pine or Pinus cimbra and Serbian spruce, Baccarat spruce and Fat Albert spruce, amber maples, white fir, red and sugar maples. A relatively rare Prunus mackay or amber chokecherry exists still near the entry of Fairmeadow subdivision, and it blooms beautifully every late April to early May. Hundreds of volunteers, I think I read somewhere there were like 300 volunteers assisted with planting just hundreds of trees, ornamental trees and shrubs and evergreens along this parkway. And in this, you can see Nancy Seiberling wrapping a flowering crabapple as well as other Project Green volunteers. So volunteers have been a very, very vital aspect of Project Green through the years. And then in 2003, Hawks Design was hired to come up with a renovation plan for Highway 6. And I worked on from Gilbert Street all the way east to the east property line of the Fairmeadow subdivision. And it really, a strong bit of the plan included a lot of maintenance work, removal of declining trees, pruning, removal of poison ivy. There was just a lot of cleanup work that occurred at that time. And then in addition, planting plants that would harmonize with the original planting design scheme. Okay. And Project Green, through Jim Maynard's professional expertise, has their own set of standards for planting trees. And one of those standards includes mulching around the base of the tree and keeping that mulch 1 inch away from the trunk and flush with the surrounding grade, so it doesn't look like a big beaver mound, basically, at the base of the trees. And also, it doesn't rot, tend to rot the trunk of the tree. These are just some images of flowering crabs along Highway 6. It is a treat. to drive this corridor the last week of April and the two first weeks of May. One time I was out checking the plant material, and there was an Asian family out just strolling amongst the flowering crabs, enjoying the flowering trees. And the plan that Hawks designed did include a bicycle trail along the south right-of-way area. And I do believe it's still part of a potential future project that Iowa City would take on. But it would be wonderful to be able to walk up close and see the trees in detail. And possibly even to label the flowering crabs, because they are, for the most part, all disease-resistant and pest-resistant flowering crabs that have survived since, 1970 along that stretch. And these show a licit dwarf flowering crab on the left. Unfortunately, the flowering crab on the right slide, Paul Dykstra recommended that crab to use, and I've lost the information on it. So I need to, if anyone knows what that crab is, let me know. It sort of has some weeping characteristics to it. Also included along the Highway 6 Parkway are native trees. Here's a picture of an ironwood, Astraea virginiana, and a close-up of it, and it just provides a splash of kind of orangey yellow during the fall. It's also incredibly drought tolerant and pest tolerant. Along Highway 6 at the intersection of Gilbert Street and Highway 6, the northeast corner, Project Green came in 2012 and decided to ask Hawks Design to provide a renovation plan for this site because it had been overgrown with plant material. And so once again, I utilized some original planting designs that had been done by Jim Maynard and harmonized with the original design, because much of the original plant material was thriving. This kind of shows a before picture of what that intersection looked like. Here is the planting plan, and I'm jumping to Melrose already here. Melrose Avenue was taken on by Project Green in 1970. This project was designed by Jim Maynard while he was working at Willis Engineering, Willis and Powers Engineering in Iowa City. And over 300 Iowa City volunteers planted 80 shade trees and 90 ornamental trees and over 500 shrubs. The planting design, again, was done by Jim Maynard while working with Powers and Willis. You may also get a sense of just how Melrose looked before any trees were planted. It was pretty expansive and open with a lot of light poles and power poles. And you can see in the picture closest to me, I believe they are amending the soil there. I think they actually took soil out and put in new soil for the plant material. Then in 1975, additional trees were planted along Melrose by Project Green. In 2001, West Melrose Avenue medians from the west entry of West High to Highway 218 was landscaped. Again, the plans were completed by Jim Maynard back then. And this shows a red maple out here. And just another picture of the effort that took place by volunteers. And this is Leon Livers, who through the years has volunteered his time and expertise repeatedly for different Project Green projects. And this, once again, Jim has provided demonstration plantings for contractors, maintenance contractors, to ensure that the planting is done correctly along the parkways. These are some more recent pictures of Melrose Avenue. We found with the emerald ash borer and then also with other issues, we're losing some trees along Melrose, and several of them have been ash. And we've replaced them with a drought-tolerant ironwood, once again, Astraea virginiana, which is a lovely, it sort of has a pyramidal shape and has an orangey yellow color in the fall. And this particular tree was planted by Iowa City Landscaping a couple years ago. North Dubuque Street was originally, the planting design was conceived by Gretchen Hershberger back in the 1970s and up to 1978. And then I was hired in 2000 and then again in 2006 to come up with a renovation landscape plan after different road improvement projects were implemented. Additionally, with the most current plans, Project Green was able to review planting designs by the architect and provide input to those plans. But this is a very old photo from 1900. That's how North Dubuque Street looked in 1900. So it's gone through quite a few different permutations, you know, up till now. This, again, lots of volunteers in 1978, and look at how barren that stretch is along that right-of-way. But they planted just an innumerable amount of trees and shrubs that were carefully selected and designed. Placements were designed by Gretchen Hershberger. And this shows an original plan by Gretchen for this stretch of North Dubuque from Interstate 80 down to about Taft Road, I believe. And many of the original plantings that she had in her plan are still in existence today along this stretch. And they included a beautiful red oak in the snow on the right corner, which is out there now, and white pines, Washington hawthorns. There was a mass planting of cockspur hawthorns that we added black haw viburnum to because they have very, very similar form, and eastern redbuds that are all thriving, different types of oaks. So she was very talented in her planting design. This shows some more current photos of North Dubuque, with including a brand new bicycle trail that was installed a couple years ago, I believe. And Project Green did also work with city engineers to help align that trail so that we could save as many trees as possible. And in addition to that, Jim had recommended a different base material for where the trail interfaced with white pines because it would change the pH of the soil. So they actually changed the base of the concrete trail to accommodate the white pines. Originally, Project Green had requested lots of fall color, so that's what I had included in the plans. And again, this just shows existing conditions of North Dubuque and the new trail as it runs along the white pines. And now we come to the Ashton House, finally, here. I'll provide a little brief history about the Ashton House. It was a former residence and engineering workshop of Edward L. or Ned Ashton who lived from 1903 until 1985, and he was considered to be the most distinguished bridge engineer in the history of Iowa. He received national recognition for designs of bridges, telescopes, dams, and other large structures. Land at 820 West Park Road was purchased in 1945, and the site initially was used as a World War II Victory Garden. Construction began in 1946 and finally concluded in 1952. Ned Ashton largely built the house himself at times with the assistance of his daughters, Joy, Ruth, and Jane, and his wife Gladys. Ned hand-cut every piece of dolomite limestone and then spalled each stone surface. The stone was selected and quarried at Stone City. The house is unique in that it sits on a perimeter structure of load-bearing walls that float on a wide footprint similar to bridge construction. The shape of the house is 3 sides of a hexagon, and Ashton's cutting-edge structural engineering work is evidenced in the cantilevered balcony, circular concrete stairway from the balcony, and the massive concrete reinforced beams at the garage and lower level workshop area. There is a security room in the lower level for the files of classified naval radar plans that Ned created during the Cold War. The room was designed to hold file safes of classified military radio, telescope, antenna, and radar plans used for guided missile communication. A steel door and window bars secure the room. The family lived in the upper level with Ashton's engineering workshop located in the lower level. Ashton had up to 12 engineers and draftspersons employed in his lower level workshop during the 50s and 60s. The Ashton family also enjoyed the natural environment as evidenced by old photographs, the existing pines, eastern redbud, maples, wildflowers. There's a grove of shagbark hickory that were planted, and old lovely magnolias still present today at the site. And Project Green became involved after the 2008 floods. The Ashton House basement and surrounding areas became flooded during that horrible time. Following the flood, Iowa City began buying up flooded properties in the Normandy Drive neighborhood area. In 2011, the city purchased the Ashton House and hired architect Thomas McInerney to provide restoration plans for the house. Hawks Design provided site improvement plans, which included an ADA ramp, south parking area, screen, privacy fencing, plantings, grading work, and a split rail fence along the south property line. The city then invited Project Green to utilize the Ashton House site for plantings, as well as to partner with the city to maintain planting beds. In 2015, the Parks and Recs Commission granted permission for Project Green to include Project Green Gardens on a plaque incorporated onto the entry monument of the site. The city agreed in 2014 to grant Project Green volunteers the use of the Ashton House garage. A stone planter and plaque honoring volunteers was installed in 2016. In 2015, Project Green partnered with Iowa City and applied for a REAP, or Resource Enhancement and Protection Grant, from the state of Iowa, and they were successful at receiving the grant. The following images show improvements made to the house, the Ashton House, prior to the REAP grant, as well as with the REAP grant. And this is what the landscape looks like out there now. If you were to look out a window at the Ashton House, it is very much a lovely floodplain area with a lot of silver maple, pin oak, hackberry, river birches, willows, and ash. And not to mention all the wildlife. There's eagles and great horned owls, raccoons and deer, and lots of different other types of wildlife out there. This is what the house or the surrounding landscape appeared like from the balcony or right outside the kitchen door of the Ashton House in 1952. And this is looking towards City Park, Lower City Park. Very interesting. And this shows a plan, a rendered plan that was part of the Normandy Drive restoration project. I was hired to focus on just the Ashton House restoration work to the site. And I think the key work that really occurred at this time period was working on the conceptual planning and working with the City Historic Preservation Commission, architect and urban planners Bob Miklo and John Yap on just where the parking lot should be situated to have a minimal impact on that site. And then also to incorporate an entry drive that was safe on Park Road so that it wouldn't impact the traffic as you enter that site. Basically, the site improvements included this is just the edge, ADA ramp, which is made out of precast concrete and was designed to go through a horrible flood if need be. And VJ Engineering provided the structural engineering for the foundations of this ramp. They had to do a special bell-shaped foundation because the soils were very sandy. So they had to do something a little different there. Also, it included a south walkway, access way, and lighting along that walkway, as well as some deer-tolerant plantings there. And it included a new bicycle trail to the west of the house along the Iowa River, as well as a new entry monument, a stone entry monument at the drive. Oh, it included a new split rail fence, as well as, again, some deer-resistant plantings. And I see some pachysandra and a deer villa in the picture there. Let's see. And then Project Green did step in and received Johnson County Community Foundation funding to install a memorial peony border along the edge of the lawn at the Ashton House to celebrate Nancy Seiberling. And these peonies are actually from Nancy Seiberling's original peony border at Fairhill, her estate. The Christensens, Jim and Carol, very graciously donated or allowed Project Green to go and divide the peonies and plant them here. And then moving to the REAP application in 2015, this shows the overall aerial view to the left, and it is a site of 7.8 acres, and it does include both a 100-year and a 500-year flood elevation. So the site is prone to flooding. But to the east, you see the Normandy Drive borders it to the east, as well as a residential property. To the south is the Park Road. It's bordered by Park Road. And to the right is the proposed plan with several improvements included in the plan that we submitted to the REAP board at the state level. Some of the improvements included a dry swale with wetland plants and a floodplain restoration. Many of the trees in the floodplain had been damaged or were swept away by the flood in 2008. So this plan, the REAP plan, included planting many floodplain trees, understory trees, and herbaceous materials that can withstand floods and deer. It also, because the facility is now rented out to the public for all different kinds of events, family reunions and weddings, the plan included a pergola area, an additional paved area for weddings and other events. This includes an outlet and also dimmable lighting, so it could be used at night. Additionally, the REAP grant included replacement of this historic West Terrace, which was deteriorating and had many trip hazards. We did, though, save the paw print from the family's beloved pet and have that treasured in the garage. And then we also saved some of the stone that was incorporated into the paving. We replaced the patio with an enlarged space with a precast concrete paver on a granular base. Included with that improvement is a ADA or American with Disabilities Act walkway out to the lower drive so that people who are challenged are able to access the back of the house. Okay. Here, interpretive signage was included with the plan, and we included interpretive signage for Nancy Seiberling as well as Ned Ashton's structural engineering workshop and the family. And these signs are located right at the front entry walk, so they're, Nancy's is near the peony border, but they're easy to access and they're fun to read, all the projects that Ned worked on. And these just show a couple sketches of the pergola and of the back terrace area. These are some flood-tolerant plants. The Arctic fire dogwood, as well as a red chokeberry, buttonbush, which is flood-tolerant and deer-tolerant. A lot of these are also deer-resistant. And then also a persimmons tree, or Diospora virginiana. Other flood-resistant plants included a straight-styled wood sedge, turtlehead, and then also ostrich ferns that are planted along a dry swale, which is very similar to a rain garden, but it doesn't really hold water. But there are moist areas along the dry swale. The soil did not support building a rain garden in this instance. It was too sandy. Other flood-resistant plants included a sensitive fern and then Japanese forest grass. Some other additional plantings was a bullhall red maple or Acer rubrum bullhall, and then a cypress. This particular cypress is a Shawnee Brave, which is more of a columnar variety and stays pretty narrow. I did hear, though, the city of Iowa City is recommending that we plant things other than maples because currently 70% of our trees are maples in Iowa City, and they're promoting looking to other types of trees to plant in fear that they might all get attacked by a bug or something. So just so you know that. Some other floodplain trees on the site include a pecan, Carya illinoisensis, hackberry, which is Celtis occidentalis, Washington elm, which is resistant to the elm disease, and then the old Platanus occidentalis or sycamore trees. Additionally, what was so lovely at this site are there's so many existing wildflowers, especially the ephemeral category of wildflowers that bloom in March and April, which is not too far away. But whole lawn areas are just blanketed with Siberian squill, and there are Virginia bluebells, prairie trillium that have the beautiful mottled leaf and a sort of a maroon-colored blossom, as well as wood anemone. So it is quite a thing to behold if you happen to be out there in March and April. Later on in the spring season, you're surprised by columbines and Virginia waterleaf, as well as jack-in-the-pulpits and woodland phlox and mayapples that actually Project Green volunteers planted some of these wildflowers that were left over from their plant fairs. A lot of their plantings go to the Ashton site that have left over. And I want to preface the following plants, I say deer resistant or deer tolerant. Actually, there really is no plant that is deer resistant, as you know. If a deer is starving, it will eat anything. But it does matter to very carefully select a deer resistant plant and provide deer protection or tree protection from deer while that plant is getting established. Oftentimes you need the deer protection for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then it matures to a point and the deer won't tend to not bother it after a while. I also noticed at the Ashton House, once we cleared out areas around plantings, deer tended to access those plants more easily, so they would get more damaged. So sometimes if you have plantings around the plant, that's a deer deterrent in itself. But this, the plantings that were included in the REAP grant plan were selected based upon their deer damage resistance. One of those was the Carolina Allspice, or Calycanthus floridus, which basically is a smaller shrub. Well, it's a 4 to 6 foot height shrub and can tolerate wet feet and kind of flooded conditions. The flowers have sort of a spacey fragrance, and the wood sort of has a camphor type aroma to it. It's a lovely, lovely plant. Another plant that we included at the site in a kind of a natural setting was the spice bush, or Lindera benzoin, which also serves as a host plant to the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. I learned that from Lon Drake here in Iowa City. And this particular plant might get 6 to 12 foot tall and has sort of a lemon color, you know, in the fall. But it can tolerate moist conditions and flooded conditions also. So this one will be very interesting to watch. The button bush, and I selected the Sugar Shack variety, which is a more compact form. It doesn't quite get quite as large as the standard form. This is planted actually right up next to the house in the handicapped ramp area. And it gets, in midsummer, it gets this very interesting flower, and I've seen it get to be about 3 to 4 feet tall. But it can tolerate flooding, standing water, and deer, actually I've not seen deer touch this, actually, from my experience. Another plant, the Seven Suns shrub, or Heptacodia myconoides, is a fantastic plant. We have some included in a naturalized area at the Ashton House. Not only is the bark interesting, but it flowers in like late August, and it sort of has a jasmine-type fragrance. And in November, the sepals that are left behind are also ornamental. So it's a very interesting tree. It likes to grow along rivers, and it can tolerate some moisture. We did put up deer protection here anyway, and because right now it's at 4 foot tall, so it still requires deer protection. Another plant that I think it's really earned its stripes as far as deer are concerned is a deer villa. Or lately they've come, the Cool Splash isn't planted at the Ashton House, but the northern bush honeysuckle has been. I would caution, though, that this plant tends to sucker. It has suckering growth. So it needs to be in a place where that's not an issue. And it will volunteer all over, but it is considered a native plant. So it's not considered an invasive weed by any means. But it has, the deer do not touch this. I haven't seen that at the Ashton House. A historic tree that's been planted, was planted years ago by the Ashton family, is the saucer magnolia, which the deer tend not to touch. You know, although I have a sister in Dubuque whose magnolias get attacked by deer, it's important to watch them at an earlier stage, and then as they get older, the deer tend not to attack them as much. So this is considered sort of a historic tree at the Ashton House. Wild ginger seems to be very resistant. For some reason, the Shadwell serviceberry at the Ashton House have not been hit by deer. Although I have a client who said the turkeys sit in his serviceberries and cause issues. The smoke bush, we did not plant the particular plant at the Ashton House, but it is very deer resistant, and I just wanted to include that. Peonies are deer resistant. They will not touch a peony shrub. Over the last couple falls, we've had many volunteers plant thousands of bulbs at the Ashton House, and deer will not eat the daffodils. So that's a great candidate for your planting plan if you have deer. And these particular daffodils are a dwarf variety or tete-a-tete, along with the Virginia bluebells in the slide closest to me. And the farthest slide there, it's a Narcissus thalia, which is sort of, it tends to spread with time and is very fragrant. Here is this particular plant is not attacked by deer, the Arctic fire dogwood, and provides a spot of color in the winter months, and can tolerate some moisture, some wet feet. So it's a good candidate for if you have deer on your site. Pachysandra terminalis is a wonderful plant. If you need a ground cover and you have deer, they tend not to touch that, as well as the bottlebrush buckeye. The Asculus parviflora is also an excellent plant, which we have at the Ashton site. And this is the monument that we installed at the Ashton House that honors all of the Project Green volunteers from 1968 until 2018. And for each one person there's probably 100 more volunteers that are not in the photo. But we just would like to acknowledge all of the volunteers that have helped through the years. And I thank you very much for your time today and being able to share this information with you. So.
Thank you, Laura. That's a lot of history in a short period of time. It's really interesting. We're going to take a refreshment break, and you can enjoy some more of the Project Green volunteers' donations with their culinary skills. My first question, because there's no questions on the sheet, is please tell us your connection to the Ned Ashton House.
Well, years ago, my father, who's a structural engineer, told me a story of a place that he went to work somewhere along the Iowa River. And he said it was a glorious place, and there were eagles flying overhead and wildlife, and he could sit in this studio and look out onto this lovely floodplain. And I found out as I was volunteering at the Ashton House, I realized this was the same place. So he actually worked with Ned Ashton. My father was a structural engineer and worked with Ned Ashton on probably a couple bridge designs in the Quad Cities, where he worked with Shive Hattery and Associates. So that was a connection, and I realized that's where he was. So.
If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you. We do this so that our listeners at home can hear the questions as well as the response. So do you have questions? Great. I'll start back here.
What's your favorite tree?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I love a lot of plant. I do love the sycamore trees. I love their towering character, even though they do get anthracnose and they can defoliate by midsummer. I just think they're a lovely tree. I remember a professor of mine at Iowa State University, Bob Dias, would describe them as the phantom of the forest because they have a striking white trunk that stands out amongst all the other trees. So that would be one of my favorite trees.
Laura, how has the Gateway affected your work on Dubuque Street, and how will you be working with the Gateway new design?
Yes. Well, Jim Maynard and I, we were invited by the Public Works Department to provide input and critique, basically, of the planting design, of the Gateway Project planting plan. And actually, I'll be honest, we weren't totally 100% satisfied with the final design. The plant material list, though, was excellent. They did respond to the types of plant material that we had recommended. However, the actual planting design left something to be desired. But they are actually not in the area between Foster Road and Interstate 80. Project Green still, designs that area. But I'm confident that we do have a good relationship with the city, that we can work with them, as the project proceeds.
Next question.
What are some of your methods for deterring deer away from plants that are not resistant?
Yes. Some of our methods, and I've worked with Ed Rendersbacher of Rendy Incorporated, who's a fantastic landscape maintenance contractor. They recommend using like a metal fence post within the planting bed circle of the tree, like the circle of mulch, so you're not dealing with removing weeds, around that space. And I like to use a black netting, ultraviolet resistant fiberglass type netting that comes up about 7 feet. And the fence post itself would be embedded approximately 12 to 18 inches in the ground. That to me has seemed to be the most successful over the years. And you tend to look right through that netting, so it kind of disappears in the landscape.
My question is, all these plants, I haven't been out to the Ashton House, are they identified with little plaques and things on them? How is that identified? Are they identified?
Many of them have been identified. This past fall, through a grant from the Johnson County Community Foundation, we were able to install plant ID markers, but we haven't identified all of them yet. And we do have some smaller scale markers that we intend to identify trees, but the current markers are very sturdy. They're in a concrete foundation and they're very strong, so yes. Yeah.
You mentioned the netting. Now, you bury it also in the ground 18 inches, right?
No, basically you just wrap it at the base of the fence post, yeah. And just go around the entire perimeter of the tree itself. Okay. Yeah.
I noticed among the slides of trees you had an American elm, Washington. Is that a viable replacement for the vanished elm, or how is it different?
It is considered disease resistant to the elm disease, and it is a viable replacement. And actually, I believe there are several others, but offhand, I don't know them to tell you right now. But I think if you went online, it would give you a listing of them. So.
Other questions?
You had a schematic of when they plant the trees, and you talked about not putting the mulch right up to the tree trunk. It looked like there was something that said container planting in there. Can you elaborate any more on that diagram?
Yes. When you're preparing a planting plan, you either spec out like a balled and burlap type tree that's actually balled and burlapped, or it's a container grown tree. So that particular detail would have been for a container-grown tree. So the advantage of container-grown is you can get those plants a little bit easier than if they're balled and burlapped, because you have to dig at a certain time of year to get the balled and burlap tree. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
I'm confused about, I'm dismayed by the behavior of deer in rubbing their antlers against things like lilac and very skinny things. I understand after a certain circumference they won't rub them, but how do you protect something big and flouncy like lilac from that? And
Yeah.
when do they begin doing that? I always
Okay.
get it on too late.
We noticed that at the Ashton House, and we did in the fall, it was in October, and I'm not sure exactly what that window of time, but I believe it's like late September, early October through December. And we did actually put the deer protection detail around shrubs, and lilacs, very thin, like the paper white birch, very thin barked or thin trunk trees. And that seemed to do the trick. I mean, they were not bothering them. They don't like to get their noses in that mesh material, basically. But that is a big issue, is when they rub their antlers and damage the trees, so.
Glad to see 3 oaks here. I'm wondering if you have anything to say as climate changes a bit about planting chinkapins or shingle oaks here.
Yeah, those are.
I'm having good luck with a couple of seedlings.
Yeah, and I believe at the Ashton House, the previous owners at the home did plant chinkapin and shingle oaks there, and they are very successful trees. So I'd highly recommend those, yes.
Yeah, pretty scarce until you get a little farther south. Exactly. 40 miles south.
Yeah.
Oak, chinkapin, and shingle.
Yeah, they're fantastic plants, yeah, really good. That's an excellent selection.
Another question?
Uh-oh.
The first one's just a simple, we can just say no, but there's no magic formula. You got to use a mechanical deer repellent of some sort, like wolf urine or some mixture, something like that. There's no magic formula like that.
No, as far as I know,
No,
but I've
yeah.
heard that wolf urine, coyote urine work. My older sister uses that in Dubuque,
That-
actually, and
The
seems
other
to
thing I
work.
was going to say, just a quick one on, a lot of things came out of that 1890s Chicago World's Fair, like the city in a garden philosophy. I guess
Yes.
we got some of that in Dubuque too. I
Yes.
don't know, do you have much thought on that at all, or just a couple words on that?
Yes,
The city in a garden.
Yes, and this particular movement that I was referring to was called City Beautiful Movement, and it really did come about after 1893, after the World Fair in Chicago, when people did walk through these civic spaces, and they were beautiful, and visitors to the fair were coming from industrial America, when industrialism was at its height. And parkways were neglected, there was no urban planning, and things were in a really bad state. And people left and thought, now what can we do? And this particular reporter, back in the late, 1800s, Robinson walked away and then ended up sharing it, across the United States, and then was hired as a urban planning consultant to several cities, including Cedar Rapids. And then there were several others that followed in his footsteps and continued that same concept. And I do think many of our cities, picked up on several of those different ideas in their urban planning in Iowa. So.
Something that I noticed that there is a lot of building houses, they ruin all the trees and everything, they flatten everything, and they build houses. But then there is no any restriction for the contractor or even, the private, somebody who just bought a lot, that if you are destroying 10 trees or all the bushes and you're flattening everything to build your house, then there is a requirement that you have to put another 10 trees that you destroyed on the border side or on the backyard or something. Is there anything that you guys can do with the city or with the people that, to just bring some sort of limitation or restriction or regulation for people that they build? So if they are destroying a lot of green spaces, they are destroying a lot of bushes, trees, then the requirement is that you have to put, after you build your houses, after you build your condominiums, then you have to make it back to the city. I think that would be one way that it can regulate, so then people, they're obligated to do something because they destroy to build houses, build condominium.
Yes, and I do know, like University Heights, for example, and several cities in the area do have ordinances, sensitive areas ordinances, that do require developers to replace trees. If they can't replace them on the site, they can donate them to the city in open space areas or green spaces. But I do see Project Green could play a role in helping to compose those ordinances that protect vegetation and trees, valuable trees on site. But typically, many cities do have sensitive areas ordinances. I do know Iowa City does. But I do, like, another issue are overhead lines and communication lines that conflict with parkway trees. And many of those trees were there before the overhead lines were in place. But I think we need to look at that ordinance and help, or actually express, our input on that and stand up for trees, basically, in our community.
That's a good campaign, stand up for trees.
Yeah.